Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, or whenever you see this. Currently, it's 10:30 in the morning, the Monday after the conference championship weekend, which Ohio State unfortunately was not part of, and we'll get into that. Joining me, as always, for our Buckeye breakdown is the illustrious Alec Koberna. Alec, I'd ask how you're doing, but we're here to talk Buckeyes, so we'll just jump into it.
Well, I'd be doing okay, except the rivals just won their third straight Big Ten title, and that never makes me too happy.
Right, definitely. And how they got there was they had to get through the Buckeyes first, and
Oh,
on the Saturday following Thanksgiving, as it is every year, the Buckeyes made the trek north, and they were not able to escape Ann Arbor with the victory. And a lot of questions are had about the Buckeyes program, despite the success that Ryan Day's had. If you know, you can say when it comes to rivalry games, they hold so much value. Like almost, you'd rather be 1-11 and beat that team up north versus 11-1 and that being the lone loss. But we'll go ahead and get started here and kind of break down what happened in that game a few Saturdays ago.
yeah, well, you talked about just a second, that being such a big rivalry game, and it shattered college football this season viewership numbers. There was over 19 million people watching Ohio State versus that team up north this season. That was 10 million more than any other rivalry game in the nation. We'll see what. I don't think we got the numbers back from Army Navy, but that's always a big one as well. But they were trying to rival up against the conference championships. So I don't think their numbers are going to do quite as well as they have in the past this season. But all in all, you can't be overly disappointed with the game for Ohio State. We knew there was problems with Kyle McCord. Those showed. We knew there was problems with the offensive line. For the most part, they did decent. There was a couple times where they definitely let up. The ground game didn't quite get to where they wanted it to be. We still had over 100 yards rushing. We only had 50 yards less rushing on the ground than our rivals. We had more total yards on offense than they did, but it came down to turnovers and decision-making. And that kind of just seems to be the case for Ryan Day. Every time we talk about a loss, it's, there was a bad turnover here, and then there was a bad decision here. That's been the case since, Ohio State lost to Clemson under him, lost to Georgia. 3 times now we've lost the team up north. Every single time it comes down to turnovers and decision-making. And Ryan Day has shown time and time again, he cannot find a way to avoid those. That's the difference between a good coach and a great coach. And that's something James Franklin at Penn State has been fighting for a long time, is trying to take that next step. Obviously, Ryan Day is still young, a very young head coach of college football. That's a very important thing to remember. If Ohio State chooses to stay with Ryan Day, which it seems like they want to do, you hold on to a guy like this for 10, 15 years, the type of person and coach he can be in 10 years is going to be miles ahead of where he is now. I think that's where Ohio State is trying to build towards. They want that Nick Saban-esque coach who can stand around for 15 years and, hold your team in the promised land, in the conversation with a 12-team playoff coming next year. What Ryan Day is able to put, the position Ohio State Ryan Day has been able to put in recently, has been right where they want it to be for this 12-team playoff coming up. And on the road, 6-point loss against the now number 1 team in the nation. It is by far the single best loss in college football this season. Ohio State got punished hard for it, though. They dropped from 2 to 5. They're 2 to 6 in the rankings. Now they dropped to 7 here after conference championship weekend with some of the wins and losses that occurred, Alabama being the big one over Georgia. But I was able to be talking a little bit more about that later. Overall, Marvin Harrison went out and did his job. The defense was phenomenal in the first half, but they folded in the second half. And that was exactly what we saw the last 2 years out of Ohio State. Jim Knowles or not, Ohio State has to figure out how to play 4 quarters. And just so far, under Ryan Day, 4 quarters has just never been the situation that he excels in. Ryan Day is a good coach and is able to lead this team in the right direction for about a half. Whether it's the first half or the second half, it is kind of a daily basis. You don't know which one you're going to get. And it just so happened this time that they didn't really get either one of them. They got a good first half from the defense and a bad second half from the defense, but then you kind of had a mediocre game all around for the offense, which you expected. Michigan has a great defense over there. Had 110,000 people. We knew it was going to be a bad environment for Kyle McCord to go into. We'll talk about him a little bit later, I'm sure, too. Overall, though, like I said, I can't be terribly disappointed with the way the game ended. And again, if this is next year, there's no divisions. Ohio State and that team in the North would be taking on one another again in Indianapolis for the Big Ten title instead of them going in there and waxing Iowa the way they did. So Ohio State, they feel like they're on the right path forward. I think the big thing, we went from Urban Meyer, an old, experienced, grizzled head coach in college football who's been doing it at that point for 40 years, to a guy who was barely 40 years old in Ryan Day. That's the big thing people have to remember, the experience gap. Jim Tressel was a national champion before he came to Ohio State. He did it at Youngstown State, my alma mater. He created a program down there. He knew what he was doing. Urban Meyer knew what he was doing. He built programs. He was a national champion beforehand. The big difference is we went to Ryan Day, first-time head coach. He's still figuring things out. And while, yes, Ohio State, like you said, you'd rather be 1-11 than 11-1. So that game was the most important game, and that's a fact. I mean, you can't be a head coach at Ohio State without beating that team up north. That was the problem in the 90s. That's why we picked up Jim Tressel, and he came in there and declared in Ann Arbor in 200 some odd days we're going to go in there and kick the crap out of Michigan, and that kind of set the edge for the next 20 years. And Ohio State, whether it's Ryan Day or whether they try and go somewhere else with it, they have to find a way to get back to that energy. And that's what Jim Harbaugh has done with them boys in blue. He's got the energy back. They all understand what the rivalry is. And that's been a big criticism of Ryan Day because he's not from around here. He played quarterback in the Northeast at a Division II or Division III college. People go, he doesn't know the spotlight. He doesn't know the rivalry. Jim Tressel did. He was from Ohio. Urban Meyer did. He coached in Ohio. He was from here. They understood the rivalry, and it's taken some time, but I think Ryan Day is finally getting there. And I think if he can clean up his decision-making and continue to push this program forward, I think they're building in the right direction, though.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. It is a big fifth Ryan Day that some fans hold against him, is that he's not an Ohio guy. That's something that Tressel and Meyer were, Jim Tressel, his dad, legendary coach at Baldwin Wallace, just outside of Cleveland. Urban Meyer, I believe he's from the Ashtabula area.
Yeah.
I believe somewhere Northern Ohio. Yeah. And then he got his start in the MAC, conference that's, very heavily footprinted here in Ohio with Kent, Akron, Ohio U, Miami of Ohio, Toledo, Bowling Green. That's 6
They got
D1
to shout out MAC
colleges.
champions Miami.
Oh, yep, there. Yeah,
Beat Toledo
they're
for it.
Yep. Yeah, that was probably one of the better games in the early time slot on Saturday because Texas laid a whooping to the
Yeah.
Cowboys, but
Raise your hand if you
uh,
saw that one coming. Yeah.
right, yeah,
That was about the most obvious pick of the weekend was Texas smacking
right,
Oklahoma.
yeah, our good friend Quinn Ewers, goes down there, and as I know we kind of talked about how we were going to go, but Quinn Ewers started out at Ohio State, entered the transfer portal, ends up at Texas, and now, about an hour before we started recording, news came out that Kyle McCord has put his name into the transfer portal, and you and I kind of joked before we hit record, this might be one of those don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you on your way out here, Mr. McCord. You know, he did have an 11-1 season for the Buckeyes,
12 and
but
1 overall as a
I
starter with the win over Akron a couple
right,
years ago.
yep. Yeah. So, he has that record as a Buckeye starting quarterback, but he's kind of thought of more in the realm of that, Joe Bowserman and, Belisari kind of in that role more so than, Troy Smith, CJ Stroud, in that upper echelon despite his record. So where do we go from here? We have Aaron Nolan set to come on board for next season. Devin
He'll be
Brown
on
is
campus in a
here.
month, so that'll be
Yeah,
huge getting Aaron Olin there. Um, and obviously, the discussion preseason this year was Devin Brown versus Kyle McCord. For this next month, it becomes Devin Brown versus Lincoln Keenholz. And I, from what I have heard, Ryan Day loves both of these quarterbacks. These were the two guys he wanted. He was never 100% with Kyle McCord, and I think that showed throughout the season that wasn't the guy he always had wanted. Kyle McCord played at Ohio State for one reason. We wanted Marvin Harrison Jr. And to get Marvin Harrison Jr., you needed his quarterback. And that is believed to be the biggest reason Kyle McCord played at Ohio State was for Marvin Harrison Jr. I would say that paid off. We got the best wide receiver in college football for 2 years. So I will take
right.
that, playing at a high level for 2 years. And he's going to go represent Buckeye Nation at the next level. Unfortunately, we won't see him in the Cotton Bowl against Mizzou, I have a feeling. But, you said where we go from here. Lincoln Keenholz and Devin Brown is going to be one heck of a quarterback competition. Then you get Aaron Nolan coming on campus in January. There's over 21-plus quarterbacks in the transfer portal this year, high-profile guys from Duke, Minnesota, UCLA, Washington State. I mean, there are guys all over the place. Oregon State's DJ Uiagalelei, former 5-star from Clemson. He's in the transfer portal. Cam Ward, Washington State, he's a big name to look at. Dante Moore used to play quarterback with one of Ohio State's young receivers, Brandon Ennis, who's likely going to start here in the Cotton Bowl. So there's a lot of names floating around. We'll see if Ohio State goes out and grabs one. I would almost be surprised if we didn't. Remember, Ohio State's going to lose Tristan Gebbia. He's our one of our backup quarterbacks as well. So for this bowl game, Ohio State's got a 2-3 deep system. You're going next year. Ohio State's 3 quarterbacks are still a super young Devin Brown, a true sophomore Lincoln Keenholz, and a true freshman Aaron Nolan. It's going to be a very young group next year. Spring game is going to be very interesting. Summer camps are going to be very interesting. No one's going to know who this starter is going to be. And I do wish the best of luck for Kyle McCord. Wish things had worked out differently with him, because I don't think he's a terrible quarterback. I just don't think he fit the system of Ohio State. And I think you kind of saw at the end, I think it became a little too much for the young man to handle. And I hope he goes somewhere else. There's a chance Rutgers, that was his dream school. If he goes to Rutgers, I think Greg Schiano turns him into one heck of a quarterback next season and potentially beyond. I think that would be a great landing spot for McCord, because he does show ability at times to just go off and turn into the guy everybody wanted him to be at Ohio State, but he couldn't do it for 4 quarters for whatever reason that was. If it was the offensive line, we had drops at times. But I think he's still got a bright future ahead of him. I'm excited to see where he goes. And Ohio State's in a bit of a situation at the moment. Who are you going to play against Mizzou, a team that challenged Georgia earlier this season? And in my opinion, is one of the top teams in the SEC. My opinion, I think they're better than Ole Miss. I have them as the number 3 team in the SEC this year. Alabama, Georgia, and then them. That's my top 3 teams. So this is going to be a huge matchup for the Buckeyes. But we're going to have a lot of guys missing, a lot of guys going to the draft. Young men are going to have to step up big time.
Yeah, and it was a few years ago at the Rose Bowl. That was kind of Jackson Smith and Jigba's kind of coming out party, and it
Marv
was
did it too.
Yeah. Marvin also last year.
So who's going to be
So
the guy this year? Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, both of
that
those
yeah.
very easily could go off. And depending on who the quarterback and how that quarterback pans out, that could very well be, the next big name making his appearance. And I think Cade Stover is going to have a heck of a game too, no matter what, because every quarterback, especially a young quarterback, you need to find your outlet man, and that's going to be your running back or a tight end. They're going to be close to the line of scrimmage. It should be an easy check down pretty much every time for one of those guys. I think that Cade Stover is in for a big game as well, as he looks to boost his draft stock as well.
Yeah, he's probably up there. Bowers is definitely the top flight
Clear
tight
number
end,
one.
but Stover's definitely in the conversation and a good, yeah. So yeah,
A good
but
Cotton Bowl
you
puts
made
Cade
mention
Stover
to it.
probably into the second round, potentially.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely agree. We see how a good tight end can definitely help an offense, especially with a younger quarterback. And Jared Goff is far from a young quarterback. Not calling him old, but you see what Sam Laporta has been able to do in Detroit this year, and they're having their
And
best
I have
season,
Cade
and
Stover very
you know,
similar to Sam Laporta. Maybe not as good. I don't know if he'll make it as big of an initial impact. I don't think he'll make as big of an impact as Sam Laporta has. But I think the upside is still there with Cade Stover. I think whoever takes a chance on him is going to get a real good stud. I mean, that guy, he's got work ethic, a very high drive to succeed. I mean, he came to Ohio State. He's played 3 different positions, and now he's a 1,000-yard receiving tight end. Just the third time in Ohio State history anyone's been a 1,000-yard receiving tight end. So he has put his name up there as an all-time great at Ohio State at his position, but he didn't start there. That wasn't his position when he came to Ohio State. He played defense. And I think an NFL team is going to take a strong look at him. I think a lot of teams are going to take long looks at him. And you want that kind of work ethic in your programs. In the NFL, it's about getting guys who are willing to work day in, day out. That was Ohio State's model. That's why it translates to the next level so well. Cade Stover, he's going to get some looks and well-deserved looks as well.
Yes, definitely. But you made mention to it. Ohio State will be playing Missouri in the Cotton Bowl. That is on December 29th. That's a Friday night. They'll be squaring off at Jerry World down in Dallas, Arlington, Dallas area. So it'll be interesting. I know traditionally, the bowl game is, the last chance to see some of your star players. Unfortunately, with the playoffs, if there is a downside to it, it is that if you aren't one of those teams in a playoff spot, a lot of your star players kind of start looking more towards the NFL draft and that what that holds for them. But like you said, the players that do play, it's a great chance to kind of springboard into next fall, kind of put your name at the top of the list for Ryan Day, for Coach Hartline, for Coach Knowles if he's still around. I know he's been tied to a few coach openings that have come about here at the end of the year. But yeah, we'll definitely see. And without further ado, let's dive into the 4 teams that made it and a couple of the teams that are just on the outside looking in.
I still want to touch a little bit on this
Oh,
Cotton Bowl game. I think that's pretty
yeah,
big for Ohio State.
definitely.
And you talked about the young guys are going to step up. Unfortunately, one of those young guys, in Evan Pryor, also isn't going to be there. He hit the transfer portal. That was a big loss for Ohio State's running back room. There was a chance. He kept getting chances. Injuries hurt him big time, and the emergence of Chip Trayanum definitely hurt his playing time as well. But that's a big loss for Ohio State's running back room. You don't know quite what that room is going to look like next season. There's a lot of moving pieces in there, a lot of players. We were expected to lose somebody last year out of the room. Didn't really happen. It finally hit him this year with him leaving. That's going to be big. But, you go into this Mizzou game, Ohio State has a lot of noise going on, and that concerns me. Jim Knowles is being interviewed this week for the head coach position at Duke. That would be a huge loss for Ohio State. Jim Knowles is finally getting that system here in his second year to where it needs to be. Next year, you don't know quite what he could do with this team. He already gave us the number 2 defense in the nation. And with the losses, that team at North is going to have potentially sanctions as well. There's a chance Ohio State would go out next year and have the number 1 defense in college football, especially with the cupcake schedule we have ahead of us next season. Jim Knowles could really do some damage and put some guys in the NFL with that defense in the schedule ahead. So, without him there, the game initially opened 6.5-point favorites for Ohio State, with the news that Kyle McCord transferred out, with the circling headlines of Jim Knowles. That line has already dropped to 3.5 in favor of Ohio State. I fully expect that line to continue to move down the other direction. Until Ohio State names a starter, I think Mizzou becomes the favorite for this game because they're coming in here pretty much nothing to lose. They lost to Georgia and LSU, two of the top teams in their conference this season, but they had a great season overall. Brady Cook at quarterback is clearly looking in his junior season to go out there and make a statement. You get a statement win against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl against the number 2 defense. Say he puts up 3 touchdowns. That kid just went from 6th, 7th rounder, could potentially bump his name up to 3rd or 4th if you can go out there on a national stage, New Year's 6, and make some big plays. And I fully expect that to be what Mizzou does, to go out there and attempt to make a statement. They got a running back, Cody Schrader, 1,500 yards this season with 13 touchdowns. He's averaging 6 yards per carry. He's a senior. You think he's not looking to boost his stock a little bit too and give himself some national recognition to send him into the NFL? There's a lot of guys for this Mizzou team that don't get the national headlines that they probably deserve, with the way Jaden Daniels down in LSU has been performing, and Alabama and Georgia being the spotlight of the SEC, the golden child, if you will, down there. Mizzou has really shined this season and last season, and I don't think any of these guys got credit for it. This is their national championship game for Mizzou. This is their biggest stage, and I think there's going to be some, especially fans here in Ohio, that are looking at this bowl game as just a throwaway game. And I think Mizzou is going to try and capitalize on that. That this might be a tougher game for the Buckeyes to go in there and try and win than it was to go into Ann Arbor, because Mizzou is going to be coming out here with a vengeance. I got a strong feeling, and you just don't know, especially who Ohio State's going to put in there at quarterback. Mizzou had 35 sacks this season. They are bringing the heat. Darius Robinson, their defensive tackle, is an absolute menace to society. This team had 9 interceptions. They forced 14 fumbles on the season. They are an aggressive defense, and that showed at times in the SEC with their schedule what this team can do. This is going to be a very challenging game for Ohio State, and I don't want any Buckeye fan to go in here thinking that this is going to be just another cakewalk Rose Bowl against bad Pac-12 teams. No, this is a top-tier SEC defense and offense that they're going up against, and Ryan Day is going to have to pull out all the stops if he wants to take this game.
Yeah, definitely. You said it. This isn't going to be a cakewalk for the Buckeyes. Even if they did have a full strength, it would still be a top tier opponent. And Missouri will have their guys that are sitting out for their reasons, but like we said, it's a chance for that next wave to come in and kind of springboard themselves to get ready for the 2024 season, which will be here before we know it. But now let's take a look at the playoffs. The 4 teams that got in. Michigan will be playing Alabama after Alabama pulled off the victory this past weekend with Georgia, and then Washington will be playing. Just escape me. Help me.
Texas.
Texas, yes, we talked about them. Yes, we talked about them with Quinn Ewers, but go ahead and take it away, Alec, with what fans should be looking for as those games get underway.
Yeah, a big thing for fans to look for these playoff games is quarterback play. You're going in here, you have look at the four quarterbacks. This might be the best four quarterback spread we've had in the college football playoff. You go from Joe Milton, who's really excelled in the back half of the season, Michael Penix, Heisman runner-up most likely this year, J.J. McCarthy, who can be really good. I'll say he has down games. They definitely don't use him as much, especially with Sharon Moore as their coach. But Jim Harbaugh is back in full swing of things with a month to prepare. I think J.J. McCarthy is going to be kind of the catalyst of that offense against Bama. You can't be one-dimensional. He's going to be forced to spread that field and open rushing lanes with his arm for guys like Blake Corum. And then you got Quinn Ewers. I mean, you're looking at a four-quarterback duel here. Big problem. I think we saw Washington really look poor against Oregon. I didn't like the way they performed in that game. I watched it. I was very interested to see how that one went. I mean, it was basically a Heisman battle. If one of those two went off, they were probably taking the Heisman between him and Bo Nix. They both kind of stunk up the place, and it left a sour taste, and immediately Jaden Daniels shot ahead of both of them in the Heisman votings. So could be kind of a revenge moment for Michael Penix to come out there, former Indiana quarterback as well. So Big Ten gets represented here. Two different quarterbacks in the playoffs, actually three with Quinn Ewers. The three former Big Ten quarterbacks, one current in this college football playoff. Joe Milton's the only one that didn't play in the Big Ten. So, you have some good quarterbacks out there, and that's going to be the big one. Quinn Ewers probably has the upper hand, and Joe Milton probably has the upper hand as well. So the 3 and 4 seeds actually, in my opinion, I think should be the favorites. Alabama has opened as an underdog against that team up north. I just saw that come out earlier this morning. Personally, I don't think Alabama's an underdog. You give Nick Saban a month to prepare for somebody, he's nearly unbeatable. But that's going to be a real tell of what Jim Harbaugh has built this program into up north. I think a lot of Big Ten fans have seen what he has done, the culture, and I think it's finally starting to be acknowledged that Jim Harbaugh isn't just a flash out of nowhere and he jumped to the NFL. I think he really is committed to stay. I know I've had my own speculations. He was being interviewed with the Bears, but I just don't see him leaving this program, not with the way he's built it. He is too invested. If he wanted to leave, I think he would have left middle of the season. I don't think he would have stuck this out and fought. I mean, this team, this culture is built around Harbaugh, and this is going to be a heck of a coaching matchup that potentially puts Jim Harbaugh finally into the conversation as one of the best head coaches in the nation if he can find a way to take down Nick Saban. I think he's already closing in on that, especially with the wins against Ohio State, 3 straight Big Ten titles. He's put his name in the hat, but I think you beat Nick Saban in the playoffs. That is top tier. Hey, this is one of those guys that is going to be respected, goes down in history like Bo Schembechler was in Michigan's record books. Jim Harbaugh is trying to put his name, trying to solidify it because he's had good regular season, one Big Ten title, but he has not won in the postseason, and that's been the big criticism against him. Same with Ryan Day. Nick Saban, obviously, years of success. That's going to be a heck of a matchup. And then you look at the other side, Washington and Texas. Texas, they got Steve Sarkisian, former Alabama offensive coordinator. What a matchup that could make for in the national title game. You go Nick Saban versus Sarkisian, especially when very few former coordinators have been able to beat Nick Saban. And it also potentially looks like an SEC championship match for next year because Texas is joining the SEC. So even though we don't technically have 2 SEC teams in the playoffs this year, the committee still found a way to put 2 SEC teams in the committee this year, absolutely screwing over Florida State in the biggest screw job in college football's last 10 years. I 100% thought Florida State was getting in this thing with the precedent that had been set before them of an undefeated conference champion gets in every time, and the fact that Ohio State 10 years ago went in to the college football playoff with a backup third-string quarterback and won the whole damn thing against the Heisman winner Marcus Mariota and Alabama with one of his top teams of that era in the fashion that they did. I thought the committee was going to have more faith that Florida State was going to get it done. There was a lot of criticism against their quarterback and the way he performed against Louisville, just 55 yards. That was their third string. Their second string quarterback would have been back for the playoffs, and he didn't do too bad in their final few games. I think they were absolutely screwed. The one thing I hope for is that Florida State goes in, absolutely rocks Georgia. That would be insane to hand Georgia a second straight loss after 29 consecutive victories. That would be one of the biggest wins of the college football season. They'd also go down as 14-0. And with the way college football works and the old grandfathered rules, if they were to finish undefeated, having a win over Georgia, if an AP newspaper, I believe it is, puts them down as the number one team, they then have a claim to be a national champion this season. So just like UCF did, because UCF was technically a national champion, what was it, 2018, 2019, because they were recognized by a paper as the number one team in the nation, an AP recognized paper, that is, as the number one team in the nation. They got to put up a national championship banner. They claimed that title. There has been plenty of times in history of which a team has won a title, but has also been claimed by another team. It used to happen all the time when we didn't have a championship game. Now it becomes pretty much unanimous, but I would not be surprised at all if there are multiple papers out of Florida, because they did it for UCF. Would not be surprised if a couple papers out there in Tallahassee put down Florida State as the number one team, regardless of what happens with the college football playoff. If they go out there and beat Georgia, the team that was ranked number one for pretty much the entire season, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because Florida State deserves to be in that college football playoff. They won 13 games. They beat the Heisman favorite in LSU and Jaden Daniels. They beat another SEC team on their schedule. They scheduled tough, and they ran the table. And now the college football playoff just went, we value money over everything else, which everybody kind of already knew. But I think we were all a little shocked to see them hand the middle finger the way they did to Florida State.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I, you try to put yourself in some of these other fans' shoes in a way, when we got on, I was like, oh man, I'm kind of feeling for those folks down in Georgia, and you corrected me pretty quickly
Yeah,
on
no,
things
I
that
don't feel for
I
Georgia at all.
wasn't
They had
thinking.
a cupcake schedule. They had a cupcake schedule all season long. They dropped out of the top five or out of the top four with the loss to Alabama. Rightfully so. They dropped from 1 to 5. Ohio State dropped from 2 to 6 with a 6-point loss on the road. They lost by 3 in their home state. So I don't feel for Georgia, really. They had 2 straight national championships. Their fans should feel just fine. Sure, disappointing end of the season, but with how tight things were, it was an elimination game for Ohio State and the team up north. It was an elimination game in the SEC championship. That's the way things should be. You have to have elimination games somewhere. Not everybody can get in. Next year, that does change, and we'll see some different things. But I think what's really going to be interesting next year is how the teams fight for those final 4 spots, because obviously to get a bye week in college football that late in the year, when your opponent has to go in and take on a top level opponent, either at home or on the road, because those will be at the higher seeds venue. So you get some really interesting storylines developing next year and how these teams are going to be fighting to the very end, because you want that bye. Because let's be honest, who's beating Nick Saban after he gets a bye week in the playoffs? That's going to be nearly impossible. I think you saw it a little bit Notre Dame earlier this season. They put 4 straight top 25 opponents on their schedule. They lost to Ohio State. They couldn't rebound because they put everything into the one game. They lost at home, and they couldn't do anything after that. It goes to show how tough it is to play against another top 10 opponent, and now you have to do it 3 straight times. If you're one of those teams not getting the first round bye, you have to go beat 3 straight top 5 opponents. College football might have just entered into the most difficult championship era of all time.
Yeah, very very interesting. We talk about the top 4 getting in, and they always put the first 2 out, 5 and 6, on the screen there. But next year, 12 teams get in. But you just made a very valid point about the top 4 and how coveted that bye is. Yeah, you don't get to host another game in your stadium, and
And you see how many
there
injuries
will
have
be.
happened in the semifinals. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. last year. Imagine you have to go in 3 straight times with the best players in college football in the most physical, demanding games that you're ever going to play. most likely any of those teams in the first round, I don't think we'll see a first round team become champion for quite a few years. It's going to take a heck of a program to go out there and do it. You look at who would be in this year. It's Ole Miss, Penn State, Ohio State. I believe Liberty would get the at-large bid, undefeated conference champions, despite the fact that they have the worst strength of schedule in college football this season. And a lot of people are not happy with them playing Oregon in the New Year's Six bowl game instead of Tulane, who a lot of people wanted to see, and obviously James Madison as well. The people wanted to see them in a New Year's Six game, even though obviously the NCAA was like, yeah, not happening. But you look at some of these teams, money. you look at some of these teams that would potentially be in this year, and this season probably would have been the best to start out with 12, because I don't think prior to this we've had 12 teams that are truly deserving of those spots. And obviously I question Ole Miss and Penn State maybe a little bit. I know some of my friends, Penn State fans, probably don't like me saying that, but I think they would agree in the end that I don't think they want to see Penn State going up against Georgia here in the postseason this year. Not the year for them. But I think it does create some interesting first-round matchups that are really going to test some of these teams and put a lot out there on the table for round twos. And there's going to be a lot of film, because sometimes, team up north this season, for example, if they weren't in the top 4, they haven't played a Power 5 non-conference game this season. This will be the first one it's against Bama. So imagine, instead their first game goes against Ole Miss. Well, now Bama finally gets to see what that team's made up of against another SEC opponent. Creates a very interesting storyline and a lot of different film for these coaches to go. I think we're going to see some of the most intense and best coach football games we've seen in a long time starting next year. Because it's going to come down to adjustments and coaching, and they're going to really have to find ways to use their personnel, playing now another game on top of this schedule to get up. Potentially, you win this whole thing, you could have played 16 games. That's borderline an NFL regular season schedule, a couple of years ago. That's a full schedule, so that it's going to be a grueling year. These coaches are now going to have to fill their depth charts and start learning how to use their reserves and rotate in a lot more guys if they're going to try and run this full gauntlet.
Yeah, and with all the realignment within these conferences, some of these schools aren't going to be able to kind of pad the schedule with some of the cupcakes that they have in years past, because, the scheduling build up that they've had for years past has kind of gone out the window for some of these conferences. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, the super conference here in the Big Ten is going to be very real. Unfortunately, all those Pac-12 teams we're bringing over are losing all of their star quarterbacks to the NFL because they're all too old at this point. I mean, Bo Nix played in his 65th game, 66th, I think it was, potentially, in college football. So, those programs are starting out from scratch. But again, it's Lincoln Riley. You got some big coaches out there, especially up in Oregon as well. It's going to create some interesting games, and I think that's why it's so important for this 12-team playoff to happen. And because you're getting all of these teams in here, great coaches, have the chance. If you lose 2 games by 3 points each, your season isn't over. And I think that's going to be huge, especially with the travel that these teams are going to have to make. The extended depth charts that are going to have to come out of these next seasons with the longer season. It's going to create a lot of very different perspectives than we've seen in the past. A lot of different storylines, a lot of different arguments. And we're really going to get down to quality losses alongside those quality wins. You're really going to have to judge, hey, if Ohio State goes into USC in September, it loses by 3 points, how does that look versus, going in and losing by a ton? There's going to be big differences in how we look at losses moving forward. And if it helps out anybody, it helps out Ryan Day, because now he can go and lose that last game of the season, and it's not going to hit us hard. It's going to hit us fans, because obviously we want to beat that team up north, and that's our protected rivalry. So we're going to still see that team up north every year, and potentially 3 times a year if it pans out that way. But I think it gives Ryan Day a little bit more leeway to start being more aggressive as a coach and start to learn this new system. He's starting out at a great time here. We're getting a lot of changes in football, and guys like Dabo Sweeney have not adjusted to it. Nick Saban was hesitant at first. I think he's finally grasped onto it and started to change for the better, and that's why Alabama is in the college football playoff, because he adapted, and the best coaches adapt. But if you also get the chance to start out when everything is moving, you get a real good chance to grab on to that transfer portal, to that NIL. And he's done that in a pretty good way so far. We'll see how he plays the portal this season. But if you can really grab onto that early, it can ride. You can ride that pretty far, and you can project yourself up into the upper echelon of Buckeye coaches if he can start to turn this thing around with the new 12-team playoff. He's going to get some chances. Ohio State should basically be in this every single year. If they aren't, then the conversation is going to open up on him getting fired again. But I think now with the 12-team playoff, Ryan Day is going to be in the playoffs every single season. It's going to be very hard to remove a head coach who's in the playoffs every year.
Yeah, very much so. Looks like I'm having some computer issues, so we'll go ahead and put a wrap on this one. We may reconvene as we get closer to the Cotton Bowl, and when some of these decisions are made by Coach Day, and we see some of the
Yeah, we got
coaching
to know who's
carousel
playing
start to
first.
slow down, and get ready. Right, right. Yeah, definitely, definitely. But as always, Alec, I thank you for your time and all of your vast knowledge of not only the Buckeyes but college football as a whole. And I'm excited. This bowl season, I know with everything that comes with the playoff, it kind of dampens some days out, and we'll see how the Buckeyes look on that night in Dallas.
It'll be a fun one. OH.
OH.
IO.